There is a war happening right now. Not in a desert, not in the ocean, not in the sky above a contested border. It is happening inside the machines that run your power grid, your hospital, your bank, your phone. Soldiers in this war don't carry rifles. They carry code. And the battlefield has no coordinates, no front lines, no ceasefire agreements. Most of the people fighting it will never be named. Most of the operations will never be confirmed. And most of the damage, when it happens, looks like an accident. #0, 2#. This is not science fiction. This is not a future threat. The United States has been fighting in cyberspace for decades, building an arsenal so advanced, so carefully hidden, that even the people who fund it don't always know what it can do. And the adversaries on the other side, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, are doing the same. Every single day, attacks are launched, defenses are probed, systems are penetrated, and the public hears almost nothing about it. That silence is not a sign that nothing is happening. That silence is the strategy. #0, 2#. This is Battletech Declassified. #0, 2#. Modern Warfare. Explained. #0, 5#. To understand America's cyber arsenal, you have to go back to a moment in 2007 when a USB drive changed history. The target was an Iranian nuclear enrichment facility called Natanz. The facility was air-gapped, meaning it had no connection to the internet. The people who designed it believed that made it untouchable. They were wrong. Somewhere along the supply chain, a small piece of hardware carrying a piece of malware was introduced into the facility's network. The malware sat dormant. It watched. It waited. And then, at a carefully chosen moment, it acted. #0, 2#. The malware was called Stuxnet. It was designed with a precision that stunned the entire cybersecurity world when it was eventually discovered in 2010. It didn't just attack the facility's computers. It attacked one specific component, the frequency converters controlling the centrifuges that spin uranium gas at thousands of rotations per minute. It made those centrifuges spin too fast, then too slow, in cycles that caused them to tear themselves apart, while simultaneously reporting to the operators that everything was normal. Iran lost roughly 1,000 centrifuges. Their nuclear program was set back by years, and the United States and Israel never officially admitted they did it. That is cyber war. That is what this arsenal can do. #0, 5#. Stuxnet did not appear from nowhere. It was the product of years of investment, development, and doctrinal evolution inside the U.S. government. To understand how that happened, you need to understand how the United States military thinks about domains of warfare. For most of modern history, there were three: land, sea, and air. Then came space, officially recognized as a warfighting domain in the late 20th century. And then came cyberspace, formally designated as a domain of warfare by the Department of Defense in 2011. That designation was not symbolic. It meant budget, it meant structure, and it meant command authority. #0, 2#. The organization built to fight in that domain is United States Cyber Command, known as U.S. Cybercom. It was established in 2009, and it sits at Fort Meade in Maryland, co-located with the National Security Agency. That co-location is not a coincidence. The NSA is the intelligence arm, the organization that breaks into foreign systems, collects signals, and maps the digital terrain. Cyber Command is the operational arm, the organization that takes that intelligence and translates it into action. Together, they form the core of America's offensive and defensive cyber capability. What they have built over the past 15 years is, by any measure, one of the most sophisticated warfighting organizations in human history. #0.5#. The term cyber arsenal gets used loosely, so it is worth being precise about what it actually means. At the most basic level, you have malware, software designed to infiltrate, damage, or control a system without the owner's knowledge. But within that category, the complexity is staggering. There is malware designed to spy, called spyware. There is malware designed to destroy, sometimes called a logic bomb. There is malware designed to give an attacker persistent access to a system without being detected, called a remote access Trojan or RAT. There is ransomware, there is wiper malware that erases everything it touches, and there are programs so sophisticated they have no commonly used names at all. #0, 2#. But malware is only one layer. The arsenal also includes what are called zero-day exploits. A zero-day is a vulnerability in software or hardware that the manufacturer does not know exists. Because the manufacturer doesn't know about it, there is no patch, no fix, no defense. If you have a zero-day exploit for a widely used operating system or piece of industrial control software, you have a key that opens doors around the world, the U.S. Government and its contractors spend enormous resources finding these vulnerabilities and stockpiling them. Some zero days are worth millions of dollars on the open market. The government pays even more to keep them secret. That stockpile is one of the most tightly guarded components of the entire cyber arsenal. #0, 5#. Here is something most people don't think about. Before a cyber weapon is used, it has to be positioned. An attack doesn't just happen in an instant from one keyboard to one target. It requires preparation that sometimes takes months or years. Operatives, either human or automated, have to find a way into the target network. They have to map the network from the inside, understanding what systems are connected, what vulnerabilities exist, what defenses are in place. They have to install the capability, the weapon, without being detected. And then they have to maintain access, because networks change, and a capability that worked last month may be blocked next month. #0, 2#. This is what intelligence officials call preparing the battlefield. It happens constantly, in peacetime, across hundreds of networks around the world. The United States is doing it to its adversaries. Its adversaries are doing it to the United States. When former NSA Director Mike Rogers testified before Congress in 2019 and said that Russia had implanted malware in the U.S. power grid, he was describing this exact process. The weapons were already in place. They hadn't been used yet. But they were there, waiting, like mines buried in a field that no one had declared a battlefield. That is the world we are living in right now. #0, 5#. The organizational structure of U.S. Cyber Command is built around what are called Cyber Mission Force teams. There are roughly 133 of these teams, organized into 4 categories. The first category is the National Mission Teams. These are the elite, the groups responsible for defending critical national infrastructure against attacks from foreign nation-states. The second category is the Combat Mission Teams, which support combatant commanders and conduct offensive operations. The third is Cyber Protection Teams, which defend the Department of Defense's own networks. And the fourth is Support Teams, which provide analytic and planning support to all the others. #0, 2#. Each of these teams is highly specialized. The training pipeline to become a cyber operator is long and technically demanding. These are not people who just know how to use a computer. These are people who understand operating systems at the level of source code, who can read assembly language, who can look at a piece of malware and understand not just what it does, but how it was made and who might have made it. The investment the United States has made in building and training this force is measured in billions of dollars and years of institutional development. And the important thing to understand is that most of this force operates in total anonymity. There are no medal ceremonies covered by the press. There are no documentaries about their missions. They exist in the background of the national security apparatus, and that is exactly where they are designed to exist. #0, 5#. Let's talk about what happened in 2016, because it is one of the most significant cyber events in American history, and most people still don't fully understand what actually occurred. Russian intelligence services, specifically the GRU Military Intelligence Unit, conducted a campaign against the U.S. presidential election that was not just about social media disinformation. That part got most of the attention, but underneath it, there was a sophisticated intrusion operation. The Democratic National Committee was penetrated. The email account of campaign chairman John Podesta was compromised through a spear-phishing attack so simple it is almost embarrassing, and election infrastructure across dozens of states was probed for vulnerabilities. #0, 2#. What the United States chose to do in response is instructive. The Obama administration was aware of the Russian operation months before the election. The debate inside the White House was not about whether Russia was doing this. The debate was about what to do about it. Officials were worried that a strong public response would look like interference in the election itself. They were worried about escalation. They were worried about revealing intelligence sources and methods. In the end, the public response was a diplomatic démarche and the expulsion of 35 Russian intelligence officers. The covert response, what actually happened in cyberspace in retaliation, has never been fully disclosed, but former officials have said it happened. That gap between the public response and the actual response is a recurring theme in this domain, #0.5#. The SolarWinds attack, discovered in December 2020, is the clearest window the public has ever had into what sophisticated nation-state cyber operations actually look like. Here is what happened. A company called SolarWinds makes software called Orion, which is used by thousands of organizations, including most U.S. government agencies, to manage their IT networks. Russian intelligence operators, the SVR this time, not the GRU, managed to insert malicious code into a routine software update for Orion. That update was then downloaded by approximately 18,000 organizations. Of those, the attackers chose roughly 100 to actually exploit, including the Treasury Department, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and parts of the Pentagon. #0.2#. The attackers were inside these networks for somewhere between 8 and 9 months before they were detected. They were not detected by any government system. They were detected by a private cybersecurity firm called FireEye, which noticed suspicious activity on its own network and traced it back to the compromised update. Think about what that means. For 9 months, foreign intelligence operatives had access to the internal communications of multiple cabinet-level U.S. government agencies. We know they read emails. We know they accessed files. What we do not know, what may never be publicly confirmed, is exactly what they took and what they did with it. The SolarWinds operation is a reminder that even the most sophisticated cyber defenses in the world have seams, and patient, well-resourced adversaries will find them. #0.5#. After SolarWinds, the Biden administration made a strategic decision that represented a significant shift in how the United States approaches cyber defense. The concept is called Defend Forward. The idea is this. Instead of waiting for adversaries to attack U.S. networks and then responding, U.S. cyber operators would go out and meet adversaries on their own networks. They would observe adversary operations before they launched. They would disrupt preparation. They would impose costs continuously, not just in response to specific incidents. The underlying logic is that cyber defense conducted purely at the boundary of your own network is inherently reactive, and reactive defenses lose. #0.2#. This is a doctrinal shift with enormous implications. It means U.S. cyber operators are conducting persistent operations inside foreign networks, not to steal data or cause damage necessarily, but to understand what adversaries are doing and disrupt it before it reaches American systems. General Paul Nakasone, who led Cyber Command from 2018 to 2024, described this posture as persistent engagement. He argued that in cyberspace, unlike in other domains, the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action, because inaction simply allows adversaries to prepare better and strike harder. Whether this doctrine is working is a question that cannot be fully answered in public, but it represents the current operating philosophy of the most powerful cyber force on the planet, #0.5#. It would be a serious mistake to think of cyber operations as purely technical. At every level, they are deeply human. The decision to launch a cyber operation against a foreign target goes through the same kind of deliberative process as a decision to conduct a military strike. There are legal reviews, intelligence assessments, policy reviews, and often presidential authorization for the most significant operations. The frameworks governing these decisions are built on a combination of existing law of armed conflict principles, domestic law, including Title 10 and Title 50 authorities, and classified policy directives that the public has only partial visibility into. #0.2#. One of the most important and least understood aspects of this legal architecture is the question of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace. International law has not settled this question definitively. The Talon Manual, a non-binding academic document produced by NATO-affiliated legal experts, attempts to apply existing international law to cyber operations, but it is not binding on any government. In practice, the United States has adopted a position that a cyber operation constitutes an act of war if it produces effects comparable to a kinetic military attack, if it causes significant destruction, loss of life, or serious disruption to critical infrastructure. Below that threshold, it exists in a gray zone where nations operate with significant freedom of action. That gray zone is where most of the action happens. #0.5#. China's approach to cyberspace is different from Russia's in ways that matter enormously for understanding the threat. Russia tends to operate in bursts, with campaigns tied to specific geopolitical objectives, influence operations around elections, disruptive attacks tied to conflicts in Ukraine or Georgia. China plays a longer game. The Chinese intelligence services, particularly a unit within the People's Liberation Army, known historically as Unit 6-1398, and more recently, a constellation of groups with names like Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, operate with a different priority: collection. Massive, sustained, systematic collection of intellectual property, government secrets, personal data, and strategic intelligence over periods of years. #0.2#. The scale of Chinese cyber espionage against the United States is almost incomprehensible. The Office of Personnel Management breach, disclosed in 2015, resulted in the theft of security clearance background investigation files for approximately 22 million current and former federal employees and contractors. Those files contain deeply personal information: foreign contacts, financial histories, family relationships, mental health records. The counterintelligence implications of that breach are still being assessed a decade later. When former NSA Director Keith Alexander called Chinese cyber theft the greatest transfer of wealth in history, he was not exaggerating for effect. The numbers involved in stolen intellectual property alone run into the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. #0.5#. Volt Typhoon is a name that, if you follow cybersecurity news, you have probably seen in the past 2 years. It refers to a Chinese state-sponsored threat actor that the U.S. government, along with allied governments in the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, publicly called out in a joint advisory in 2024. What made Volt Typhoon significant was not just who it was, but what it was doing. Unlike typical espionage operations focused on stealing data, Volt Typhoon appeared to be pre-positioning itself inside U.S. critical infrastructure, including communications, energy, water, and transportation systems, for potential use in a future conflict. #0.2#. The specific technique Volt Typhoon used is called living off the land. Instead of installing distinctive malware that security tools might detect, the operators used legitimate tools already present on the systems they compromised, things like built-in Windows administration tools, to move through networks and maintain access. This makes detection extraordinarily difficult because the activity looks like normal system administration. The FBI director testified to Congress that Volt Typhoon had compromised hundreds of U.S. organizations. The implication, stated directly by U.S. officials, was that China was building the capability to disrupt critical American infrastructure in the event of a conflict, most likely over Taiwan. That is not espionage. That is preparation for war. #0.5#. North Korea occupies a unique position in the global cyber threat landscape. Unlike China, which primarily uses cyber capabilities for espionage and strategic positioning, or Russia, which combines espionage with influence operations and disruptive attacks, North Korea uses its cyber capabilities for something more immediate: making money. The regime in Pyongyang has been sanctioned into near-complete economic isolation. Conventional trade is largely impossible. But cyber theft is not subject to sanctions, and the North Korean cyber force, known as the Lazarus Group, among other names, has become extraordinarily good at it. #0.2#. The numbers are striking. United Nations panels have estimated that North Korea has stolen over $3 billion in cryptocurrency through cyber operations between 2017 and 2023. A single heist against the Ronin network in 2022 netted approximately $625 million. The 2016 Bangladesh bank heist, in which North Korean operators attempted to steal nearly $1 billion from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York by compromising the SWIFT international banking network, succeeded in taking $81 million before an error in one of the transfer requests triggered a review that stopped the rest. These are not petty crimes. These are state-sponsored financial operations of a scale that would be remarkable for any criminal organization. The money, according to U.S. and UN assessments, goes directly to funding North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs. #0.5#. Iran is the fourth member of what security researchers sometimes call the Big Four nation-state cyber threats to the United States. Iran's capabilities are less sophisticated than China or Russia, but they are significant and growing, and Iran has demonstrated a willingness to use them in ways that the others generally have not. In 2012, Iranian hackers, using a piece of malware called Shamoon, attacked the Saudi Aramco oil company, destroying the data on approximately 35,000 computers and replacing it with an image of a burning American flag. It remains one of the most destructive cyber attacks against a private company in history. The recovery took months and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. #0.2#. Iran has also conducted sustained operations against the United States directly. In 2013, Iranian hackers gained access to the control system of a small dam in Rye, New York. The dam's sluice gate controls were fortunately offline for maintenance at the time, so no damage occurred. But the intrusion was alarming because it demonstrated both the intent and the technical capability to attack physical infrastructure. More recently, Iranian groups have conducted extensive operations targeting U.S. defense contractors, think tanks, and government agencies, primarily focused on intelligence collection related to sanctions policy, nuclear negotiations, and regional military posture. The level of access they have achieved in some cases has surprised U.S. officials. #0.5#. Let's step back and talk about critical infrastructure, because it is the central vulnerability that makes cyber operations so strategically significant. Critical infrastructure is the set of systems and networks so essential to national life that their disruption would have catastrophic consequences. The U.S. government has identified 16 critical infrastructure sectors: energy, water, communications, transportation, healthcare, financial services, and 10 others. Every one of these sectors depends on computer systems. Every one of those computer systems is connected to networks. And every one of those networks is, in some way, reachable by a sufficiently patient and resourced adversary. #0.2#. The electric grid is the example that gets the most attention, because electricity is the dependency that everything else runs on. Take down the grid in a major population center for weeks or months, and hospitals lose power, water treatment plants stop working, food supply chains collapse, and communication systems fail. A 2018 report by Lloyd's of London estimated that a serious cyber attack on the northeastern U.S. power grid could cause economic damage of up to $1 trillion. That is not a fringe estimate. That is a mainstream insurance industry calculation. The U.S. government has invested heavily in protecting the grid, but security researchers who have examined those defenses have consistently found them insufficient. The gap between the threat and the defense is real, and it is not closing fast enough. #0.5#. One of the most consequential and least discussed developments in U.S. cyber strategy is the increasing involvement of the private sector. Here is the structural problem. The U.S. government owns and controls approximately 15% of the nation's critical infrastructure. The other 85% is owned and operated by private companies, power companies, telecommunications firms, water utilities, financial institutions. These companies are responsible for defending their own networks against nation-state adversaries with billion-dollar intelligence budgets and thousands of highly trained operators. That is a structural mismatch that no amount of good intentions can fully resolve. #022#. The government has tried several approaches to bridge this gap. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, was created in 2018 to serve as the main interface between federal cyber capabilities and the private sector. CISA shares threat intelligence with private companies, conducts vulnerability assessments, and responds to major incidents. But CISA's authorities are largely advisory. It cannot compel companies to implement security measures. It cannot require disclosure of breaches in all sectors. And its budget, while growing, is a fraction of what a credible national cyber defense would require. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in 2021, which shut down fuel supplies to the southeastern United States for nearly a week, demonstrated exactly how exposed private sector infrastructure remains. #052#. The Colonial Pipeline attack is worth examining in detail because it illustrates several things about the current threat environment that are not well understood. In May 2021, a ransomware group called DarkSide, which operated from Russia, penetrated Colonial Pipeline's networks and encrypted their data, demanding a ransom of approximately $5 million. Colonial, fearing that the attack might spread from their business networks to their operational technology systems, made the decision to proactively shut down the pipeline. That decision caused immediate fuel shortages across 6 states, long lines at gas stations, panic buying, and a declared state of emergency in multiple states. #022#. Here is what is important to understand about that attack. DarkSide was not a government operation. It was a criminal organization, a relatively small criminal organization. The attackers gained initial access through a single compromised password, one that was not protected by multi-factor authentication, on a legacy VPN account that should have been deactivated. The most disruptive infrastructure attack on U.S. soil since 9/11 was accomplished by criminals using a single old password. The Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom. The FBI subsequently recovered approximately $2.3 million of it by tracking the cryptocurrency. The rest was gone, and the fundamental vulnerabilities that allowed the attack were not unique to Colonial. They exist across hundreds of similar companies. #052#. Artificial intelligence is changing this domain faster than almost any other development in the past decade, and it is changing it in both directions simultaneously. On the offensive side, AI tools are making it dramatically easier and cheaper to conduct certain types of cyber operations. Spear phishing emails, once recognizable by awkward phrasing or errors, can now be generated by large language models to be virtually indistinguishable from legitimate communications. Vulnerability discovery, once requiring significant human expertise, is being accelerated by AI systems that can analyze code at scale and identify potential weaknesses far faster than human researchers. The barrier to entry for sophisticated cyber operations is dropping. #022#. On the defensive side, AI is enabling detection capabilities that would have been impossible to scale with human analysts alone. Machine learning systems can monitor network traffic at speeds and volumes no human team can match, identifying anomalous patterns that might indicate intrusion. They can correlate signals across thousands of endpoints simultaneously. They can identify malware variants that have never been seen before by recognizing behavioral patterns rather than specific signatures. The question is whether the defensive applications of AI will outpace the offensive ones. Most cybersecurity professionals, when asked directly, will say they don't know. What they do know is that the organizations that move fastest on AI integration will have significant advantages over those that don't. And right now, that race is genuinely competitive. #052#. There is a concept in nuclear strategy called deterrence, the idea that you prevent an adversary from attacking you by making the costs of doing so unacceptably high. Deterrence shaped the entire Cold War. The question that has occupied strategists for the past 15 years is whether deterrence can work in cyberspace the same way it works with nuclear weapons. And the honest answer, based on what we know, is not really, at least not in the same way. #022#. The problem is attribution. Nuclear deterrence works because if you launch a nuclear missile, everyone knows who launched it. In cyberspace, attribution is hard, slow, and often contested. When a cyber attack happens, it may take months to determine with confidence who did it. Attackers can use proxy servers, compromise third-party infrastructure, and techniques designed to mimic the style of other nation-state actors, what researchers call a false flag operation. Even when attribution is eventually established, the response options are constrained by concerns about escalation, by the need to protect intelligence sources, and by the lack of agreed international norms about what responses are proportionate. The result is that the costs of conducting cyber operations against the United States have historically been lower than rational deterrence theory would predict. That is a problem that American strategists are still actively working to solve. #0.5#. Ukraine has become the most important real-world laboratory for understanding what cyber war looks like when it is integrated into a conventional military conflict. Russia conducted significant cyber operations against Ukraine before and during the full-scale invasion that began in February 2022. In the hours before Russian tanks crossed the border, Russian hackers used a wiper malware called Hermetic Wiper to destroy data on hundreds of systems across Ukrainian government agencies and private companies. They also conducted an attack on the Viasat satellite communications network that disrupted not just Ukrainian military communications, but satellite internet service across Europe. #0.2#. What happened next surprised many analysts. Ukraine did not collapse. Its digital infrastructure did not fall apart. There are several reasons for this. First, Ukraine had years of experience dealing with Russian cyber operations and had built significant resilience into its systems. Second, Western governments and technology companies, particularly Microsoft and Google, provided substantial assistance in identifying and mitigating attacks in near real time. Third, Ukrainian defenders turned out to be more capable and more adaptive than Russia's planners anticipated. The lesson that emerged from the Ukraine experience is that cyber operations can cause significant disruption, but they are rarely decisive on their own. They are most effective when deeply integrated with other forms of military and information operations, and Ukraine's defenders understood that integration better than Russia's attackers. #0.5#. The question of offensive cyber operations is one that the United States government discusses publicly only in the most general terms. What we know from declassified documents, congressional testimony, and investigative journalism gives us an incomplete but revealing picture. We know that Cyber Command has conducted offensive operations in support of military campaigns against ISIS, disrupting their communication networks and financial operations during the campaign in Syria and Iraq. We know that operations have been conducted against Russian election interference infrastructure. We know that the United States has targeted North Korean missile program systems with cyber operations that may have contributed to a series of failed missile tests between 2016 and 2017. #0.2#. What we don't know is far larger. We don't know the full scope of U.S. offensive cyber capabilities. We don't know which foreign networks U.S. operators currently have access to. We don't know the details of operations that have succeeded or failed, and we don't know the full extent of covert cyber operations conducted under intelligence authorities rather than military ones, because those are classified at a level that congressional oversight is limited and public disclosure is essentially non-existent. The United States government has made a deliberate policy choice to maintain strategic ambiguity about its offensive cyber capabilities, for the same reason that you don't publish the combination to your safe. The ambiguity itself is part of the deterrent. #0.5#. Space is the next frontier in this domain, and it is already a contested one. Satellites are critical to almost every aspect of modern military and civilian life. GPS navigation, communications, intelligence collection, missile warning systems, financial transaction timing, weather forecasting, all of these depend on satellites. And satellites are increasingly targeted by cyber operations. The Viasat attack mentioned in the context of Ukraine was one example, but the vulnerability goes much deeper. Many commercial satellites in operation today were designed without cybersecurity as a primary consideration. They run software with known vulnerabilities. Their ground control stations are connected to networks that can be reached by adversaries. #0.2#. China and Russia have both developed what are called counter-space capabilities, a combination of kinetic and non-kinetic tools designed to degrade or destroy adversary satellites. On the cyber side, this includes jamming, spoofing, and hacking ground control infrastructure to interfere with satellite operations, or in the most extreme scenario, to commandeer a satellite entirely. The United States Space Force, established in 2019, has a cyber component responsible for defending military satellite systems. But the commercial satellite industry, which the military increasingly depends on, is defended largely by the companies themselves, with widely varying levels of sophistication and investment. The convergence of cyber and space is one of the fastest developing threat vectors in the entire strategic landscape. #05#. Let's talk about the people who defend against all of this, because they rarely get acknowledged. The cybersecurity workforce in the United States, across government and private sector, is operating under a shortage that is genuinely alarming. Estimates of the global cybersecurity workforce gap run between 3 and 4 million unfilled positions. In government, the problem is compounded by salary limitations that make it difficult to compete with private sector firms for top technical talent. A skilled cyber operator who can earn $300,000 at a private cybersecurity firm or technology company will think hard before accepting a government salary of less than half that, even accounting for other benefits. #02#. The people who choose public service in this domain do so knowing they will likely earn less, face more bureaucratic constraints, and receive almost no public recognition for their work. When a cyber defender successfully stops an intrusion campaign that would have compromised a major government agency, there is no press release, there is no ceremony. There is usually a classified after-action report that almost no one will read, and then back to work. The human cost of sustained, high-stakes cyber operations is something that doesn't get discussed enough. Burnout rates in this community are high. The cognitive load of operating in a domain where the adversary is constantly probing, where the stakes are national security, and where the work is entirely invisible is significant. The people doing this work deserve more acknowledgement than they will ever receive. #05#. Where does this go from here? The trends in this domain point in several directions simultaneously, and not all of them are reassuring. The proliferation of cyber capabilities to non-state actors, criminal groups, mercenary firms, and even individuals with advanced skills is lowering the barrier to serious attacks. The attack surface is expanding as more critical infrastructure becomes connected to networks. The integration of operational technology, the computers that run physical systems like power plants and water treatment facilities, with information technology networks creates new vulnerabilities that are extremely difficult to secure. And the geopolitical environment, with great power competition intensifying across multiple domains, is increasing the incentives for all of these actors to develop and use offensive cyber capabilities. #02#. At the same time, there are reasons for cautious optimism. International norms, while not binding, are slowly developing around certain categories of cyber operations, particularly attacks on civilian infrastructure during peacetime. The Cyber Solarium Commission's 2020 report produced a detailed reform agenda for U.S. cyber policy, and significant portions of it have been enacted into law. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has grown substantially in capability and reach, and the investment in cyber workforce development, while still insufficient, is larger than it has ever been. The wars nobody sees are not going away. But the United States is building the capacity to fight them more effectively than at any previous point in its history. Whether that is fast enough is the question that keeps the people who know the most about this awake at night. #05#. Here is where we land. America's cyber arsenal is real, it is powerful, and it is constantly in use. It is a force that operates without fanfare, without visible battlefields, and without most of the public ever knowing what it does. The wars being fought in cyberspace right now, today, as you listen to this, are as consequential as any conflict being fought with conventional weapons. They shape the balance of power between nations. They determine what secrets stay secret and what capabilities are exposed. They influence elections, financial markets, and the physical infrastructure that daily life depends on. #02#. What we know is that the United States has invested more in this domain than any other nation. It has built the most capable offensive and defensive cyber force in history. It has developed doctrine, legal frameworks, and operational concepts that are shaping how every other nation thinks about this domain. What we don't know is whether that investment is enough, whether the defenses are strong enough, whether the deterrent is credible enough, whether the adversaries are being held back, or whether they are deeper inside American systems than anyone has publicly acknowledged. That uncertainty is not a failure of the people trying to protect those systems. It is the nature of the domain itself. Cyberspace does not offer clean answers. It offers probabilities, assessments, and the constant awareness that somewhere, right now, a war is being fought that most people will never see. #0, 5#.